When you listen to music, do any images appear to your inner eye? Do you see colors, shapes, or textures? I do. I'm a musician, and I have something called synesthesia. Now, if the word synesthesia sounds like an exotic disease to you, you're not alone. But really, for me as a musician, it's much more of a gift than a disadvantage. Synesthesia is Greek for joint perception. It means that information from different senses connects in my brain, and in my particular case, that when I listen to music, images appear in my mind. Today, I'm going to talk to you about a piece called Talea by the French composer Gerard Grisey. When I first heard this piece a few years back while studying for a class, it absolutely blew my mind. Not only because it's such an amazing masterpiece, full of intricate detail, but also because of these fantastic, interesting images that appeared in my mind while I listened to it. So naturally, I was curious to find out more about this piece, and I set out to uncover its secrets. My research led me to find a book by the French author Jérôme Bayet, who wrote a book about the work of Gerard Grisey, which has a very concise chapter on Talea, filled with complicated numbers and forms. I set out to decipher all of this information, trying to relate it to everything that was in the musical score. And after an intense period of study, I finally arrived at an understanding of the piece and all of its subtleties, which was extremely rewarding. I wanted to share this understanding of this fantastic piece with a wider audience, but in a way that wouldn't require the same kind of efforts from my audience that I had to go through. Today, I'm going to tell you the story of how I translated the music, to this sculpture, or music frozen in space. And I'm going to tell you much more about this sculpture later. When you listened to this musical example, did any images appear in your mind? Did you see any colors? Were they bright colors or opaque colors? How about lines? Were the lines moving, or were they flat and still? How about textures? To me, this passage sounds like lines moving rapidly from low to high and back again, because the pitches in this passage move from low frequencies to high frequencies and back again in a sort of oscillating pattern. These lines are bold because the dynamics or loudness of this passage is very loud. So imagine waves on the ocean on a stormy day, and you'll get a feeling what this looks like to me. I also see the color yellow because the sound color or timbre of this passage is very bright, and yellow is a bright color. So you might imagine the sun coming out through the clouds on this very stormy day. It might not be something you'd see in nature so often, but in music, anything is possible. Now we're going to play a slightly longer example for you, and I would like to ask you to listen and notice if any images at all start appearing in your mind. To me, this passage sounds completely different from what we heard before. There are a few loud spots, mostly played by the piano, but most of this part is long, sustained notes. It's very, very quiet. There's lots of silence in between the notes, and you get the feeling of this vast soundscape with all of these spaces in between. So the way I see that is lines, horizontal lines, not moving much, perhaps a little bit now and then. The lines are vague because the dynamics are very soft. I also see red and purple colors, like a layer of very complex colors, because the sound color is very warm in this passage. So you might imagine the ocean on a very still day. There's no wind, and you have this serene atmosphere and a red sun appearing in the horizon. Most likely, when you were listening to these examples, some of my descriptions would ring true for you and others not so much. Research in the field of synesthesia has shown that some associations between sound and image are quite common and others not so much. For example, when I was talking about music moving from low points to high points, that is probably something many of you would have recognized because many of us associate low pitches or frequencies with something that's positioned in a low place in space and high frequencies with something that's positioned high in space. Some of you might also have perceived a bright sound color, although perhaps for you it wasn't yellow, could have been orange or green. To me personally, I don't only see yellow because of the bright sound color, but also because I personally associate the pitch C with the color yellow, and the pitch C happened to dominate this first part. This is what we usually refer to as synesthesia, these very, very personalized experiences which vary from person to person. The field of synesthesia is still in its early stages, so we haven't quite reached a point where we can draw boundaries between more common experiences and the experiences that we categorize as synesthesia, or perhaps even metaphors, but much more research will be done in this area. So musicologists have recently started using all of the cognitive research in the field of synesthesia and other related fields to use visualizations as a tool for music analysis. When the composer of Talea, Gerard Grisey, sadly passed away in 1998, much of the research I just mentioned was yet to happen. But images were a crucial part of his way of thinking about music. He wrote this amazing treatise that details the bones, flesh, and skin of music. So I think it would be fair to say that he was a fellow synesthete. Talea was written in 1986, just 1 year after I was born. It's written for the instruments flute, clarinet, violin, cello, and piano. The piece bears the subtitle, The Machine and the Rankweeds. Now, to explain to you what this means, imagine that you're a gardener and you want to sow your seeds and turn them into a beautiful flower in time. So you meticulously plan when to sow your seeds, the exact distance between the seeds, you water them every day, and you expect them to grow at a certain pace so that they will grow into amazing flowers at a certain point. And this is how the machine in Talea works. It can be described as a collection of processes going from one extreme to the other. All of these processes are very carefully calculated, and there's a lot of mathematics involved. Now, imagine that in your perfect garden, suddenly weeds start appearing. At first, they're like little spontaneous growths, appearing here and there. So the rankweeds in Talea are spontaneous melodies that are very free and not structured, so in that way, the complete opposite of the machine. Here's one of them played by the clarinet. So before I go on to explain how the machine and the rankweeds are illustrated in this sculpture, I want to mention a couple of the composer's intentions. Grisey was interested in exploring the aspects of speed and contrast. He describes the piece as two parts connected, which express two auditory angles of a single phenomenon. Now, the description two auditory angles of a single phenomenon is what originally gave me the inspiration to create a sculpture, because the word angle is something that we usually associate with objects placed in space. So indeed, if you look at this object, this part represents the first part of the piece. This part represents the second part of the piece, and the middle part shows how the two parts are connected. Part one of the piece is characterized as being loud, having a bright sound color, and lots of rhythmic activity. Indeed, the very first example we played for you is an excerpt from part one of the piece. Here's another example from the very beginning, played by the piano. So let's look at this ending of the tube in a little more detail. So the background color is yellow because of the bright sound color. And notice it's just one color. It doesn't have that many layers. On the outside of the circle, you see 5 strands circling along. And these 5 strands represent the 5 voices. So green is the piano, red is the cello, purple is the clarinet, orange is the violin, and blue is the flute. And you'll notice they don't quite go together. And this is because in part one, all of the 5 voices have separate musical material. So they begin the phrases together, they don't begin their phrases together, and they also have separate endings to their phrases. So the music is not synchronized in time. They all have separate material. If you look at the inside of this, you'll see these green lines. they're sort of wild and have big amplitudes and very bold strokes. And this is how I imagine the very loud dynamics and active textures, kind of like the waves that I described earlier. Now, let's talk about the second part of the piece. So the second part of the piece is very quiet and mellow and has these vast spaces in the textures. And here's an example played by the violin and the flute. So if you look at the second part of the tube, you'll see that it has these rich layers of sound colors. So it has all the colors of the rainbow, but it's dominated by the colors red and purple. And this is because it has this rich sound color that's mostly dominated by warm sound colors. On the inside of this tube, you'll see very, very light pink texture with lots of white spaces in it. And that's how I see the silence and all of the space in the music. So let's look at the side of the object. So what happens here is that the 5 voices come together and they enter the second part where all of the voices play as one voice. And the way I've depicted this is that the 5 strands come out at the end of the circle of the first part, and they all find their separate place in the colors of the rainbow in the second part. These black drawings represent the rankweeds in the piece and how I see them. So, before I finish, I would like to leave you with a quote by the famous German thinker and writer Johann Wolfgang von Goethe, who wrote an amazing treatise on color. And he said that music is liquid architecture and architecture is frozen music. With those words, as we play the final part of the piece, I would like to invite you to embark on your own journey of imagining your own musical architecture. I hope I've inspired you to go and listen to this amazing piece for yourselves. Thank you very much.